Hello and welcome to another roundtable discussion from Pro Prep Coaching. I'm Dr. Andrew Chappell, head coach here at Pro Prep Coaching, and I've got with me today Natalie, Rob, and Dave. Dave is wrapped up nice and warm because he's getting ready for another competition this weekend. He's clearly feeling the chill. How are we all doing, guys?
All good, thanks, boss. How you doing?
Yes, not too bad myself. Not too bad myself. So if you haven't already, check out the other roundtable discussions that we've had already, listeners. We did one the other day there on training and intensity methods around loads. We also did one on sets and repetitions as well at the same time. So you can check them out on episode 1 and 2. There's also a nice little recap there on how hypertrophy works. Guys, if you like this podcast, then be sure to like us, subscribe to us, and check out our website, www.proprepcoaching.com. And also be sure to check us out on the gram as well, and at all of our Instagram handles as well to follow us at the same time. What's your handle, Dave?
David T, personal trainer on Instagram.
We've got Rob.
Rob does bodybuilding.
And then Natalie, last but not least.
At Natalie Woods, 1804.
1804, and I'm at Fueled by Scott's Oats. So guys, today we're going to talk about training again. I mean, it's a topic that we could talk in great length. We could do multiple episodes, but we've covered a few things already. Today we're going to talk about though resting and recovery. So not maybe even talking about training. We're talking about the resting element and the recovery element, an important part of the training. So obviously, when it comes to hypertrophy, you can go back and listen to that first episode. But one of the elements around hypertrophy is creating metabolic stress and creating damage to actual tissue itself. And there has to be a period of time of whereby our muscles can respond and recover to that stress that we create on the muscles so that we can get an adaptation. So challenging the body to do something it's never done before, but we also have to have that recovery period. And that's basic super compensation theory at the end of the day, and how we get responses to both strength and to hypertrophy, or to endurance training as well, because things like improving our VO2 max is the same as well. Would you say that's a fair summary? And there's the need for rest, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start going with our round table, and we're going to talk about rest and recovery. Now, Dave, you're carb depleting, so he has got a carb brain fog at the moment. So we said that we'd be kind to him. I'm going to chair this one, and I'm going to pick you out, Natalie, here. So when we talk about rest, let's talk about rest between sets and stuff first off. So let's come in here on this one, and I'll let you go down the rabbit hole in this.
So for me, I mean, your rest periods between sets is very much dependent on kind of your rep range. Obviously, the heavier the weight you're going for, closer to your 1 rep max, etc., the longer you'll need to recover between sets to be able to bring the intensity to your next set. So I always think that it's something that you have to learn to gauge based on your own personal experiences. If you're going into your next set feeling fatigued and you're not able to hit the reps, prescribed reps, then possibly you need to take a little bit longer. Obviously, like, you know, if you're going kind of to your low reps, like, I don't know, 3 to 5 reps, you know, you might need 2-3 minutes before you go back in. Higher rep ranges, you know, you can go sort of 45 seconds, you know, up to kind of 2 minutes really. But I always think that if you're going in and you feel really, really fresh, then that might be an indicator that actually you can push it and cut down those rest periods a little more. And I think it is very much dependent on the individual. So whilst, you know, there are guidelines out there based on the sort of number of reps you're doing, it's something that, you know, you have to really be a bit more in tune with your body and sort of how you're feeling going into your next sort of working set, I think.
Okay, I think that's really nice, Natalie, and I agree with a lot of the points that you raised there. If I come to you now, Dave, Rob, on this one, in terms of those prescribed guidelines and so on, you can maybe speak a little bit about that and then tell us your take on resting, because I know you're doing a lot of strength work as well, along with your hypertrophy.
Yeah, so the same with you. I agree with a lot what Natalie said there. It does depend a lot on your rep ranges and your kind of how close you're getting to your 1 rep max. If we go back to probably all of our basic training when it comes to personal training and learning things like that, you can take the quote unquote best optimal, if you want to throw that out there, rest periods. And if you were doing some powerlifting training, doing 5 sets of 5, you could be seeing a 4 to 5 to 6 minute rest period, depending. This is the key point here, depending on the individual. Me myself, I'm quite I keep myself quite fit, so I feel like I can recover a wee bit quicker between sets. So I'm more of that lower rep range, that lower time scale of closer to 4 minutes. And the way I see about it, you have to really be in tune with your body when it comes to strength training and use the data from each session to move on to your next one. So if you're going to go with, right, my coach or my most optimal windows between 3 and 4 minutes, all right, I'm going to go 3 minutes here. Okay, there was a wee bit of fall off near the end of my sets there. Am I going to next week push it to 4 minutes? So it's all about that, them individual needs and recovery capabilities. And we're not talking about session to session. We're talking about recovery capabilities immediately after each set. And there's lots of different things that you can do it by, even just by your heart rate. If your heart rate's still quite elevated, you might be needing to go more 5-6 minutes. And that there is just on that 3 to 5 rep range there. You would just do the same thing going up the rep range. Higher rep range, we know if you're doing more hypertrophy based things, you're talking between 1 and 2 minutes. And then if we go to the endurance stage of things, so if you were doing, we'll take bodybuilding for example here. The end of your workout, you've done your big compounds, you're doing isolation stuff. I've seen people being able to perform with between 30 and 90 seconds rest in between these exercises, because it's not as demanding on the body. It's not as demanding on elevating the heart rate. So that's what I would say about that, if you want some actual numbers out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's nice. Those are all good stuff there. I know, Dave, you're sitting in the background waiting here patiently. So I'm going to let you come in on this one. And I wonder if you can touch on some of the physiology, or you can leave that to me. But what do you think?
Well, first off, I want to start with a caveat that I've never been very good at resting or taking deloads and stuff like that. I always tended to, in the past, run myself into the ground, get injured, or find that progression would plateau. And I would find, why is this not working? I'm lifting heavy every week, and then you reach that ceiling and nothing moves. Now, there is an interesting reason that happens. And I'm going to totally butcher the science of it here, and you're going to tell the right version in a minute. But
okay, right.
as people, we've kind of got like our genetic potential and then also adaptogenic potential as well. And that comes down to the breakdown of our muscle fibers. So I'm sure everyone's heard of type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers.
Yeah, this
you've
is
also
great
got
stuff.
And type 1 is your slow twitch, type 2 is your fast twitch. But you've also got a group of muscle fibers, the type 2As, that will actually adapt to the activities that you do and to the demands you put them under. And obviously, you think sort of, who are the best weightlifters in the world? Okay, you're thinking like, Bulgarians, Eastern Bloc, Russians. Genetically, they've got a higher proportion of fast twitch fibers. So they've got a bigger pool, and maybe you don't really see that many super duper long distance runners from Russia. So they got a smaller pool of type 1 fibers. And if you think about different countries around the world, you can get a gauge of what the kind of genetic potential is there. But you've also got that pocket that will adapt depending on what kind of activities you partake in. And this is why you end up with powerlifters taking 10 minutes rest between their sets. It's not because they want to be dicks, even though that is how it comes across sometimes, that taking the platform up for the entire time you're in the gym. It's because they don't want any of their demand and the questions they're asking their body to ask the body to have greater endurance to make them ready to lift faster. It's got to be all about power and strength, lifting the heavy weight. And so if you think about how I would have trained and hitting those ceilings, I was lifting heavy weights. Great. That's going to put me more prone towards building strength, building power. But then if I do that for a month, okay, maybe a little bit of it's going to start tilting towards having the endurance to keep on lifting weights for a month, 2 months, 3 months. soon your body's having to divert lots of resources towards being able to maintain the endurance to keep on going without ever really taking a proper break. And that's where, for me, one of the main benefits of deloads and rests really comes in, especially like rests, not like between sets rest, but like rests from training, is because it gives your body that chance to kind of hit the reset button, and those adaptogenic muscle fibers kind of revert back to type. And their type is to assist with strength work. It's a very long-winded way of saying it, but it's like your body adapts to what you actually do. So the rest is really important, and the deloads are really important to take into account with that, because they can help you maximize your output in the activities you want to be good at.
Okay, good stuff there. You're totally right, Dave. The body does adapt to exactly whatever you throw at it. It gets better and better at doing from there. In terms of these adaptations and so on. So, Rob, you were talking about shorter rest periods basically for hypertrophy work and lower percentage of 1 rep max. I think it's basically what you were saying.
Yeah.
And longer rest periods for higher intensity work, e.g. strength training. And I don't know if you find this, guys, but certainly nothing will teach you how to take rest more than blocks of strength training, because it will humble you. And I think it's probably one of the most overlooked variables when it comes to training. A lot of people just don't time their rest, they don't think about their rest, and they just get on with sets. And it's important even for those 8 to 12 rep sets. If someone's only taking a minute rest, they might think that they can find that they can perform at a higher threshold if they just take 2 minutes rest from there, and they might get more out of their workouts just doing that sort of stuff. Now, all of this stuff is contingent on metabolic waste products. So we all know about chasing the pump, yeah? So we're chasing the pump, we build up lactic acid. And if that lactic acid is still there, it stops us from being able to do the exercise. And that lactic acid builds up as a consequence of an inability to convert lactic acid into pyruvic acid and then go to the next step of the Krebs cycle. And that's, if we're getting into physiology of what's going on. So what the rest does is it allows us to dissipate that lactic acid so we can then recover, and then we can then perform the next set. And that's really where we're operating in those bodybuilding rep ranges. With the strength training, it's slightly different. It's all about creatine and phosphates, those high energy phosphates. And if we do those really high maximum sets, then if we don't rest them long enough for 3 to 5 minutes, or as you said, Dave, even longer than that, and Rob, you had a good example, then you don't recover those phosphates. And then you fail sets, not because you're not strong enough, just because you've not allowed yourself to have the phosphates to recover. So I think it's important that we sort of put that a little bit of science in there, so people can see, right, okay, this is why it's important and why I need to be taking the rest periods in here. And you're right, Dave, your body does always adapt. And Rob, my experience is with a lot of strength trainers and power lifters is they're not that fit. You're totally right in what you're saying. It might not be that their phosphates aren't recovering, but their heart rate's not recovering after that intense set. So they need to take longer. And you're right as well, Dave, in that if you can get those rest periods shorter, down to a 3 minute after a really heavy set, then you will adapt. You'll get better and better at training within that range from there. And we'll come back to the muscle fiber types from after that. Has anyone got anything else they want to say on the rest periods from there?
It's more just take it all with a bit of a pinch of salt, that not everyone is going to be the same human being in terms of their training. So and don't feel like there is a norm, because everyone is different. Everyone is different with that. And the best way to do it is get in the gym, time your rest periods, collect some data. Don't just guess it, actually properly record it, and go from there and work it out. Work it out for yourself. It's a good wee activity.
Yeah. Anyone else training with a stopwatch?
Super humbling.
I train with a stopwatch.
No,
I don't.
The gym's got a good clock.
Yeah, I just have my phone, and like literally you can see kind of the second hand going around on the little clock there. So
it is super humbling using timed rest though, if you're not used to it, because most people, especially if you're doing hypertrophy work or if you're doing kind of more not kind of specific strongman powerlifting stuff, and it has got a bit of volume in it. People are not as strong as they think they are within those rest periods, and they'll start with like maybe 80 on the bar for bench press, and then it'll be down to 60. Done it myself, and I've seen it with clients as well. And yeah, it's a good one because it's another element that you can challenge yourself with, is recovery speed during a workout as well.
Yeah, no, of course. And you can, you know what, I mentioned about cardiovascular fitness as well, right, at the start of the show as well. This is like rest, you can manipulate in that as well. So if you're doing like interval training or cluster training or anything like that, then you can time the phases in which you spend cruising and sprinting at the same time. And those are our important variables that we can manipulate. The thing about the not all human beings being the same, though, that's great stuff, what you're saying, Rob, and it ties back in with what you were saying, Dave, about muscle fiber types. There is that genetic propensity that some people have got a high amount of those type 1 fiber versus a high amount of type 2 fiber, or type 2 fiber A or type 2 fiber X. I forget the nomenclature that they're all assigned at the same time. I don't know, Natalie, have you got any experience with this stuff you want to come in on, or Dave, do you want to explain it in a little bit more detail? I don't want to put you on the spot.
You're probably the most qualified to explain it.
Okay. So basically, what you're looking at really with someone that's got a lot of type 1 muscle fiber, that's someone who's got a really high endurance capacity. And with a type 1 muscle fiber, what you tend to see is it's got a much larger concentration of something within it called mitochondria. Yeah, and mitochondria, they're the real powerhouses of the cell. And what mitochondria are really good at is converting energy from respiration, using carbohydrates and fats to give us ATP. They're really good at that, yeah? And if you've got a high concentration of these type 1 fibers, then it allows you to convert energy very well, convert oxygen very well, and ergo, as long as you've got the muscular endurance capacity and the fuel there, you can exercise for a long period of time, really, really long period of time. So you can do lots of high reps, but also think like marathons. You can run for 4 hours or for 2 hours now, actually, is what they're doing them in if you need to. So that's one end of the sort of scale. And then at the far end of the scale, you've got that type 2 type fiber. And type 2 fibers, how they work is they've got a high concentration of actin myosin filaments, and they're really good at high energy contractions. So they can generate a high amount of force really quite quickly. Yeah. So that's the difference. Not as dense in terms of the mitochondria, but really good at performing movements in that sort of 1 to say 12 rep range. And people have got a high concentration of these type fibers. They tend to have really thick muscles. And then that's more your bodybuilder, your powerlifter, your Olympic sprinter, if you like. And we're all made up of that sort of genetic composition of some type 1s, some type 2, and people who have got different concentrations of these may excel in some sports or the other. And then, Dave, as you rightly say, there's a whole gamut of other fibers that exist somewhere along that continuum as well, that take on some characteristics depending on how you train it. And you're born with a higher concentration of some over the other. And that's where the genetic variation comes in. Does that all make sense?
Yeah. You were saying about the kind of thicker muscles of the type 2 there. And all I could think of is the difference between taking cyclists, for example, long distance cyclist legs versus like the velodrome ones. The sprinters that have the quads that are bigger than big rammies, versus the long distance ones which don't have as much muscle on their quads, and it just kind of shows you there, gives you a little example.
It's like the difference between you and me, Rob. I'm all type 1 and you're all type 2.
It throws up interesting conversations about if you were to get a genetic test, if you were to just find out you had a higher concentration of one over the other, does that mean you should train your muscles in slightly different ways, e.g. a higher rep scheme or a smaller rep scheme or a lower rep scheme? And it might not necessarily be that you've got more muscle fibers. You might have the same amount. It's just that actually they're larger, so they take up more area from there. And I mean, speaking to physiologists, guys that work on this stuff down the years, they've told me that the difference actually between these fibers is perhaps not as great as I'm making out here from that. They're more similar than you actually think, which is another interesting thing. But it does explain how some guy might be a powerlifter who needs more rest, and it might not be his fitness compared to the powerlifter that's got a slightly different composition, which needs less rest, if you like, on this. Would you like to hear what some of the research says? Because I looked into this before we got into this conversation.
That sounds good.
Bring it out.
Okay, right. This is going to sound like some of the most obvious research you've ever heard, right? But I looked at a few different sort of studies on this and looking at what happens if you take 2 different rest period lengths, and then you look at what happens in terms of the number of rest repetitions that people can perform. So this is Fleck et al. Okay, I think this is 2007. So 3 minutes rest versus 1 minute rest, 6 exercises, 3 sets, 14 participants. It's an acute-based study, okay? And what they find is by the time you get to set number 3, and the further you get down the session, if you take a slightly longer rest period, you're more successful at completing the reps. And again, no real surprises there. As I said, it's fairly obvious stuff, I think. What is more interesting, though, is I think if you take 6 months of resistance training and you take a 2-minute rest period versus a 5-minute rest period, what actually happens in terms of cross-sectional area, so the amount of muscle mass that you've got, things like free testosterone, cortisol, and isometric strength, yeah? So this is much more interesting. And I mean, this particular research here, I think this is, who's this one? This is Marek et al. And Hacken. He's done a lot of stuff as well. And they actually found 2 minutes versus 5 minutes didn't make any difference to all those parameters in terms of overall muscle mass after 6 months, yeah? Fascinating stuff. And then I've got another one here, which is a systematic review, looking at the effects of 23 studies, 413 males, 78 females, and they were looking at sort of slightly shorter rest periods versus slightly longer rest periods, and it was 60 seconds versus 2 minutes, and also, yeah, that was it. And what they found was, in terms of hypertrophic responses, didn't really make all that much difference between the 60 seconds and the 2 minutes, but in terms of strength gains, this slightly longer rest period seemed to favor that, yeah? So it comes back to that sort of thing that we were saying earlier on around about individual responses, and a variable that's worth manipulating, but maybe not necessarily going to make a huge amount of difference sometimes, is what I'll say, depending if you're going for hypertrophy versus strength. So that's rest periods. Recovery. What do we mean by recovery? So Natalie, I see you're smiling on this. Let's come in here.
Okay, so I'm probably going to use a phrase that's always kind of bandied about, but you can only grow from what you can recover from. So most importantly, like, you know, if your body doesn't have, if your recovery doesn't outweigh the stress that you're putting on it, you're going to have negative effects. So there's obviously the thing that I'm coming back to is kind of the general adaptation syndrome. So obviously the stress that you're placing on your body can kind of, initially it will dip, because obviously you're placing new stresses on it, then it will kind of super compensate, and that's where your strength increases, you know, you start to grow, etc. Eventually, if you're not allowing yourself sufficient recovery, you then reach kind of an exhaustion stage. And I think what it's really important for me that I think people always forget about is when we're talking about stress, we're not just talking about training stress. You've got to think of every single component of stress in your life. So it can be kind of psychological, emotional stress, sleep, nutrition. It's a whole package. You can't just jump on one and neglect the others, because they will all have a knock-on effect. So I think people just think of it in terms of what they're putting into their training, and they forget about that every single thing that's going on in the background is adding to your like levels of systemic fatigue. So everything has to be managed. You know, it's the full picture, not just your training.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Natalie. I totally agree. We call that the allostatic load, how much stress you're placing on the body, the money worries, family concerns, job anxiety, all that stuff loads down on you as well at the same time, on top of the training, a poor diet or illness and all that sort of stuff. And that's what we're often talking about in terms of allostatic load. And all that affects the recovery beyond what you're doing in the gym at the same time. And if we want to maximize our growth, then we have to try and get all our ducks in a row with those other areas of our life as well at the same time. So I totally agree with you. I think that's great stuff. Rob, what recovery? How can we recover? And then what's your take?
Well, a bit like Dave, I'm going to be saying things that I feel like I should implement a wee bit more, because I understand why, but I think, like a lot of people, there isn't enough recovery tools being utilized. So obviously Naz explained the reason for recovery, things like that. So I'll talk about kind of different types of recovery. There's a big difference between just taking a day off from the gym and actually performing some recovery activities using some recovery tools, i.e. Stretching, massage, yoga, going to the spa to use jacuzzis, steam rooms and that. And it's how much more can you get out of your rest days while doing one of these things. So rather than just resting and giving yourself 24 hours of not being in the gym, could you be doing a lot more to prevent these other stresses kind of taking over? So going for a sports massage, getting your full body kind of primed and ready for its next block of sessions, is that going to prevent injury and allow you to maybe even go further? It's always the prevention over cure when I say for these type of things. Sports massage, physios, even like just doing your stretching, you're preventing injuries rather than just curing them. So getting a regular routine with that, that's what my kind of take of it is. So I'll let Natalie explain the science, and I'll explain the difference.
I'll let Dave come in here and mention this, and Natalie can explain the science if she wants.
It's fine. Going third is actually harder for the guy who's carb depleting, because they're using up all the good stuff before I get to say anything. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, so I'll bear that in mind.
I'm going to give something really simple and obvious that everyone already knows, and then I'm going to give an analogy instead on kind of like your body's processes that will maybe add something. First thing is, you need to have enough sleep. It's when you're actually sleeping that your body does the majority of its physical and mental refreshment. So if you're not getting enough sleep, and by enough sleep, I know that's different for different people, but we're talking like 7+ hours spent unconscious in bed, each night or on the sofa or whatever, to actually maximize your body's chances of getting good recovery. And when you go back to what Natalie's saying, it can only grow from what it recovers from. It's like our body doesn't have like an unlimited amount of laborers to build the extra extension, like on the house, which building bigger biceps, re-knitting the sore muscles in your quads. So if you ask it to do too many things at the same time, you'll lose efficiency on all of them. So if you're not recovered from a session and you're still achy and sore, and then you go in and smash it again, your body's then trying to recover from the first session and is trying to recover and build from the first session and then recover from the second session as well, which ends up meaning you diminish your gains, as in your muscle gains, and you also diminish the speed of your recovery in future as well. So slowing things down sometimes and, asking it one question at a time can make it more effective, both in recovery and in muscle growth. Sometimes less is more.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, Dave, and I would second that. When I first started working out, I remember this is the way guys worked out, right? They trained Monday, Tuesday, they took Wednesday off, they trained Thursday and Friday. And that was it. And I think that was really popular at the time, and it might have just been a sign of the times, was Dorian Yates and his high intensity training methods. And he was always massive on do less so that you can recover more. And that's when I first started. And I don't know where it's come from, but in the last 5-6 years, there's been a paradigm shift towards a push-pull legs method, whereby people are doing 3 days, 1 day off, 3 days, 1 day off, something like that. So they're now training more than ever. And I think it's probably one of the number one things I do when I work with guys is that I reduce the amount of training days they do. Because I see more and more people just simply overtraining and just under recovering, to use your sort of term. So that's just a sort of thing that I picked up on. I've picked up on down the years. I think the stuff you're saying, Rob, about recovery tools is so important from there. And I'll come back to Natalie on this. So you can obviously manipulate sets, because that in relation to the frequency of the days in which we train. Yeah, obviously. So if you're doing push-pull legs, then you should reduce the amount of sets. That's often not what we see, because they're still training a lot of sets over 6 days rather than doing less sets. Is it different for the experienced trainer, would you say, or the less experienced, or the comp prep competitor, Natalie? What do you think? How do you program things, or what have you seen? Or what's your own experience?
See, I think the more experienced someone is, and this comes back to knowing your own body and knowing your own limits and what you recover best from. And the more experienced you are, the more you understand what works for you in terms of what you can recover from. So I actually find that the more experienced someone is, the more accepting they would be of as you're saying, maybe training 4 times a week as opposed to 6 times a week, because they understand that I'm not going to get quality out of 6 sessions a week. You know, the more sessions I do, the worse, the lower intensity they actually are. So I think when someone's a beginner, they think they need to be in there every single day of the week. So it's kind of often reining them in, and because they're obviously keen and they want to be in there at every single opportunity. So I think it's easier to work with someone who's a bit more experienced because they know their limits, and they can actually say, well, I've tried training 5 days a week or 6 days a week, and it's too much. I generally work best off of 4. And we're all so different, and it comes down to a lot of different factors such as general fitness, age, etc., as to how much you can recover from and how much else you've got going on in your life. So I mean, obviously when I've got someone first starting off who's not ever had a structured program in place, I'll start from a quite a low number of sets per session, and maybe 3 times a week, and maybe work it full body. So I will start low with people. However, as people are more experienced, as I say, they know themselves more and they know what they personally can recover from.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a good way to take it. Rob, have you got anything you want to say on this one?
Yeah, I think it is more the experienced trainer will have more recovery capability in them, and potentially will be able to do that. But then you also have to think about it from experienced trainer will know how to really push their body. And if you know how to really push your body and, in essence, destroy a muscle group, you might need to bring that frequency down, because that's how you train now, and that's how you need to train to create a hypertrophy response. And therefore, you're creating more fatigue on the muscle. So therefore, you need to actually leave it longer. So it's almost a balancing act. You've got that recovery capabilities, but you're such a more experienced athlete that you're actually breaking down the muscle harder, but can recover quicker. So it almost evens it out as you go up the stages. That's kind of my take on it. For me, I always find that I can recover quite quickly between sessions. Some muscle groups are a bit longer than others, but I think everybody has that. But at the same time, I'm pushing myself a bit further. So am I just pushing myself through the sessions too much and thinking I'm recovered, but deep down, like Dave said, I'm not fully recovered, and it's just getting added on top of each other? So in hindsight, I think it's actually a harder question to answer.
Okay. I mean, I know you've got to head off, Natalie, and I know you've got some nice little tools that you can measure this sort of stuff with as well, in terms of how do you know you're maybe overtraining then, Natalie? Because these are things that you've mentioned in the past, I think, with max recoverable volume, heart rate variability, things like that?
I think really, for me, there are lots of indicators. Like if your strength is starting to dip, going into your next session, if you're really just feeling demotivated, you're not enjoying it, you're starting to, dislike a particular session. But, the biggest one for me is that literally, if by the time your next, say, leg session rolls around, you're still struggling to walk from the first one, you've pushed it too far for your body to be able to recover from. I always think if I'm not kind of feeling recovered within a couple of days, sort of maximum, then possibly I might want to look at what I'm doing, the number of sets I'm doing, different exercises, because clearly it was just a little bit too much. So it's always kind of how you're feeling in yourself. And I think the big one that I always notice with people when I think, well, really, this person, we either need to look at what we're doing with their training or they need to take a deload, is that general sense of lethargy around training. And I don't want to do it, and that kind of, the changes in mood, appetite, etc., all those sort of markers, immediately it's like this person needs to back off for a week, and take it easier.
No, that's all good stuff. I'll let you head off because I know you've got to go, and I'll pass it on to Dave there. Thanks for joining us, Natalie.
Cool. No problem. See you later, guys.
Natalie.
Just before you go.
Bye.
Bye.
Catch Natalie later. Okay, so Dave, do you want to come in on this one in terms of the deloads and when to take one, and how do you know when to take one?
Yeah. So first off, I couldn't agree more with Rob in that people being different. And some people, for example, you could have two completely identical beginners. One comes in, trains 6 days a week, and they're not sore at all. And then you've got one who trains 3 days a week, but they're absolutely burst and their legs are still sore a week later, like Natalie said. And that, again, depends on the intensity with which you train and also what choices you make while you're in there. Because if you discourage people as a blanket rule, don't go in the gym 6 days a week, you won't have enough time to recover. That's not taking into account what they're actually doing while they're there and how well they're delivering it. So again, it comes back to the previous chats we did about intensity, exercise choices, how you balance things out. And then you kind of model your recovery for them based on that. Because as you say, push-pull legs is doable 6 days a week, but you do have to ramp down the sets, ramp down the difficulty a bit so that you can actually maintain doing it over a long period of time without doing yourself a damage or without minimizing your benefits because your body's too fatigued.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But that, unfortunately, that's not what we see, is it? We just see guys smash themselves still from there. In terms of when would you know it's okay to take a deload, Dave? Or when would you program it?
There are statistical things that you can look at. As a coach, I will always, because obviously we are always talking to our guys about how are you feeling? How are your energy levels? You know, and then so you look at that, and if they're feeling really tired, that's one thing. And then you look, does that correlate with how they're performing in the gym? How are their numbers in the gym? If their numbers are going down, or if they're dropping steps, or if they're missing stuff, then okay, this person's maybe getting a bit fatigued and you would program it in. But as a general rule of thumb for me, for everyone, is that unless they're in some sort of specific comp prep with a specific competition date coming up, every fourth week is a deload week, where it's a reduction in overall weight, maintaining the volume, and then just working with maybe a slower tempo to ensure you still get good intensity through the session. And this means that as well as obviously muscles getting recovery, your joints get a bit of a rest as well. Because if you're pounding heavy weights through your hip hinge, through your knees, through your shoulders, week in, week out, in the end, something's going to burst. So having that fourth week is almost like a little bit of a reset and then back in tends to kind of help in the long term as well.
No, totally agree. That's kind of the rule of thumb that I take as well. It's that everyone's different, but most people are going to need a deload between week 4 and week 6. And if they don't need the deload by week 6, I'm going to make them take the deload anyway, because I know it's going to help them in the long run, because of all the things that you mentioned in terms of how your joints are feeling, how the body's feeling in terms of the central nervous system from there. Statistically, there's things you can measure. So you can measure heart rate variability. So is there a large amount of variation in the heart rate compared to what someone's normal heart rate is? How long is it taking for them to reach the recovery heart rate? If these things are elevated, then you'd probably know it's time to back off a little bit on these things as well. Motivation's a classic one from there, just listening to the client at the same time. And then if you want to, I mean, you can measure things in people's blood. So creatine kinase is a classic one for muscle damage. If that remains consistently elevated for a period of time, then that's something that you maybe want to have a look at, alongside other things like cortisol and testosterone being suppressed as well at the same time. But we're not, unfortunately, got access to a lab all the time to do that sort of stuff. So just asking the biofeedback from there. The final thing I just wanted to sort of say was coming on was this recovery stuff, Rob. So your top recovery things, Rob, that you'd recommend? So you mentioned things like sports massage, but is there anything in there that you want to add?
Well, for me, my main one is sports massage, and for me, it's actually acupuncture and
really good, yeah,
deep tissue stuff. But the best I've ever done is having it a bit like your deloads. I booked it in every 4 weeks, so it was a regular thing. It wasn't the best I've ever felt in terms of like lower back issues, hip issues, is when it was regular. I wasn't just getting it when I was sore. And it was almost like every session I was less and less needing it, but it was preventing it always. So that would be my biggest tip. Get a regular massage and don't just wait for you to get injured.
Okay, and Dave?
Get the MOT rather than wait for the car to break down. Yeah. I agree with Rob completely. Just regular maintenance, stretching, getting enough sleep, feeding your body the right foods as well is also important for physical recovery. But just what you guys have been saying, just take care of yourself.
Yeah, okay. And I think, you know what, that's the difference between what I would call as somebody who's just a bodybuilder and someone that just lifts weights, and someone that I would describe as an athlete, is that the athlete is prepared to do all the additional bits and pieces they need alongside their training in the gym to maximize performance. And that means maximizing your recovery there as well. And that's the high performance approach to sport, because my experience, Rob, is the same as yours. When I regularly book sports massages and things like that, the MOT's in place, the service is in place, and I don't break down. Yeah. In terms of a few other things, swimming's great. I've done yoga, really good as well. My ideal scenario is 2 days of training, 2 days off, 2 days of training, 2 days off. That's how I recover best. And for the guys over 30 years old, I find that works well for them. Contest prep's an interesting one. At the moment, Dave, the big thing that we've been talking about for yourself is, because you are getting ready for the shows, try to have you fresh on stage and not overdoing it. But we've cut back on training, and we're recovering more to keep you fresh for the stage than what we were doing a few months ago. Then we were really going for it from there. And that's an interesting point as well, because that's an approach that some people probably aren't used to hearing, where they think they have to go as hard as they possibly can.
Yeah. And I mean, you take into account as well the diet aspect, the glycolic supercompensation. When you restrict carbs and then suddenly you put them back in, it's like working really hard and pushing yourself. Your body ends up looking quite flat. And especially if you're on the bike 40 minutes every day, like I have been, no sympathy though, it's a choice. You can end up looking a bit stringy, and you don't look as full and as big as you should. So by taking that kind of like the foot off the gas ever so slightly in the lead up, the 2 weeks leading up to a show, you can find you end up with a much fuller, fresher looking body on stage, which hopefully we will do this weekend and next weekend.
Yeah, of course, that's the goal. I've just got a little thing on some more research here to wrap this up on deloading. Do you know that this is something that is not as well researched as you might think? There's not as much stuff on this one, but I did find a one study by Avan et al. And Mitchell's the overall supervisor of this one, where they looked at the molecular differences in muscle mass when you do high volume training and you take active recovery versus passive recovery. And what they see is if you do 6 weeks of training and you're looking at 10 sets of 10 and you look at the molecular differences. So if you look at a whole soup of stuff, so these sort of markers like mTOR and things like cortisol or cross-sectional area, you're looking at other stuff like EK. Oh, well, I'm not even going to try and pronounce them for here because I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But the difference is after a week, there's not a huge amount of difference in terms of these markers that for it to be any meaningful difference from 1 week. But that's only a 6-week study, guys. And we need more research on this to sort of really say. But I would always sort of err on the side of getting the MOT work done and from here. And this study sort of really does show that active recovery and passive recovery, both of them are worthwhile doing from here on out. So you need to take the rest. Does anyone have the last word on this one? I think you got it last time, Dave. Rob's going to get it.
One final point is, if you are a bit like probably me or Dave, who don't really like deloading, one thing that I've always found is, if you don't want to go into the gym and do the devolumized sessions, I've always found taking like 4 to 5 days completely off and just not going into the gym as effective as just doing the devolumized sessions. So that's one thing I'd want to bring up is, for me, a deload is taking between 4 and 5 days completely off the gym rather than doing the deload sessions. So that's just a personal one for me, but I just thought I'd throw it out there to make people know that there is other options.
Yeah.
It's a good one. No, really, really good. I've done that before as well, Rob. We should mention that there's different ways you can deload as well. You can reduce the intensity and keep the sets the same. You can reduce the number of sets. You can also reduce the intensity and the sets, or you can just take it off, as you say, and your coach is going to make the best choice for you, depending on the biofeedback you get. Dave, you can have the last word.
Get your rest, guys. Don't be broken at 37 like me.
Help as well.
Honestly, like, I only ever take deloads when you tell me to, because I feel like if I'm not pushing myself in the gym, I'm not doing it right. It's just always been, and it's kind of, it gets imprinted on you. I would never dream of letting a client go that long without a deload, but I would go 3 months, 6 months, hard as I can every session. It's always good to have someone there providing oversight and making sure you're doing things the right way too.
That's why I forced you to take the deloads, Dave. That's why I'm forcing you. And you're looking better for it. Right, let's wrap this up, guys. I'm Dr. Andrew Spell, Pro Prep Coaching at Fueled by Scott Soaps. We've got Rob.
Rob at Rob Does Bodybuilding on Instagram.
And then we've got David.
Yeah, David at David T Personal Trainer.
Okay, guys, if you found this information useful, then please do check out the rest of our roundtable discussions that we've got, as well as along with the other Pro Prep content we've got here on YouTube. Check out the website, www.proprepcoaching.com, and find us on Instagram as well at Pro Prep Coaching if you think that we can help you with your contest, physique, or body transformation goals. Thanks very much, guys. Thank you for your attention. Peace.
No worries. Cheers.
Bye.